All right, we're still factoring. So, last week, we talked about factoring x squared plus bx plus c. Whenever we had a leading coefficient of 1. We talked about factoring that form whenever we had a leading coefficient other than 1. Correct? You guys remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. Today we're factoring by what we call grouping. Factoring by grouping. So, we factor by grouping when we have the number of terms in my polynomial is 4. What are the number of terms been in the past? How many terms have we had each polynomial? 3.
3.
Right? Terms are separated by addition and subtraction. So in the past we've had 3 terms. Today we're dealing with 4 terms. And we're looking for pairs of terms that have a GCF. What does GCF stand for? Greatest common factor. The very first thing I need to do still is look for a GCF in the whole polynomial. See if I can factor anything out to begin with. And then I can look for groups or pairs of terms that have a GCF. Okay? Everyone okay with that? We're writing this down or can I move on? Okay, I'll give you a second. Okay, are we good to move on now? Okay. So here's a couple of examples that we're going to go over. 15m cubed plus 18m squared minus 5m minus 6. 2b cubed plus 3b squared minus 14b minus 21. Those are 2 of the 3 examples we're going to go over. I'll give you the third one on the very last slide. You got the examples written down? Or are we still writing? Okay. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on. We'll get to the examples again. We'll write them down again. So, steps to factoring success. Step 1, I want to factor by grouping. To do that, I want to group 2 terms to have a GCF and factor out their GCF. So group together 2 of your 4 terms and factor out their GCF. You might want to write this down, yeah. After that, we're going to do that again with our second pair of terms. So you're going to group together 2 sets of terms and factor out each of their GCFs. Step 2, after I've factored out both sets of GCFs, I'm going to factor out the common binomial in each term. And we're going to look at that here in just a second. When we're factoring by grouping, we should have a common binomial when we're done factoring out the GCFs. So we can then factor that out. And then it's factored completely after that. Okay? So like I said, hopefully factoring this way is pretty easy. Hopefully you guys will grasp that once we go over our examples. We good? Okay, let's get to our examples. Our first example from the previous couple of slides, 15m cubed plus 18m squared minus 5m minus 6. So step 1 says to factor by grouping. I'm going to group 2 terms together that have a GCF. Anyone notice GCF in
15
15 and 5? What else?
18 and 6.
18 and 6. What else?
There's more?
There's different. Most of the time, it's easiest just to group our first two terms together.
You can do that.
Yeah, we can do that. Do they have a GCF?
Yeah.
Yes, they do. Huh? Bless you.
Probably 3.
They don't have a GCF?
It's 3.
I don't know, it's fine.
Okay. 15 and 8, what's the biggest number that goes into both of those? 3.
Number
It's
3.
3.
How many M's do they have in common?
2.
2. So I can factor out a 3M squared. Does everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay. 3M squared times what would give me 15M cubed? 5M.
5M.
Remember, the exponents, when we multiply, has to add up to give me 3. Right? Okay, so 3M squared times what would give me 18M squared?
6M squared. Nope.
Just 6. Right?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to group my last two terms together as well. Anyone notice the GCF between those two?
No.
1.
Is it 1?
1, not just 1.
Negative 1.
Negative 1. They're both negative, correct? So I can factor out a negative 1. Negative 1 times what would give me negative 5M? 5M. Everyone okay with that? Negative 1 times what would give me negative 6? 6. Everyone see that? What do we notice about what I've done after I factored?
Did you say 6?
What do we notice about after I group and factor out a GCF?
But they're similar.
How?
Exactly the same. Except for the numbers outside the parentheses.
Very good. So,
I think I said that
shh, please quit talking. So I've done step 1. I've grouped two sets of two of my terms together and factored out a GCF of each set. Correct? Step 2. Now, factor out the common binomial in each term. A binomial has how many terms in it? 2. Like a bicycle has 2 wheels, binomial has 2 terms. So do we have a common binomial,
Yes.
a same binomial between the two of these?
Yeah.
What is my common binomial?
5M plus 6.
5m plus 6, right? That whole polynomial in the sets of parentheses. They share that, correct?
Yeah.
So I can technically factor that out as well. So that's one of my factors. Anyone know what my other factor is going to be?
Negative 1.
Not just negative 1.
Negative 1M squared.
Not negative 1m squared.
1.
It's going to involve 3m squared and negative 1. I just put those together
Negative 3M squared.
to get 3m squared minus 1. Because, remember, we're factoring 5m plus 6 times what would give me this mess? Times 3m squared, right? And then 5m plus 6 times what would give me this mess? Negative 1, right? So my first factor is what they have in common. My second factor is what's outside the parentheses. Okay? Everyone see that? Can I do another example? Okay.
That's the answer?
That's my answer.
5M
5m plus 6 times 3m squared minus 1. That's my answer. Questions on that? Yes?
I understand how you got the 3m, but how did you get the square with the 3m?
Because that's our GCF between these two terms. The biggest number that goes into 15 and 18 is 3. And then this one has 3 m's, correct? This one only has 2. So how many m's do they have in common? 2. So I can factor out an m squared. Okay? Questions on 1? Shh. Quit. Number 2. Look for a GCF in my whole polynomial. We forgot to do that on number 1. But did I have a GCF out of my whole polynomial on number 1?
No.
No. So I couldn't factor out a GCF. So, number 2. Do all 4 of my terms have a GCF?
No.
No, they don't. So I can't factor out GCF to begin with.
Wait, can't you do like 2 and 2b squared and then 14 negative 14b? And then like 3b squared and 3b. Yeah.
Say it again.
Okay, so can't you do the 2 and the 14 and 3 and 21?
You could, but what's going to be easier than doing that?
Grouping it.
Just grouping the first two terms together. And then group my last two terms together. Okay? So what's a GCF for my first two terms?
2b squared.
What's the biggest number that goes into 2 and 3?
1.
1. So I'm not factoring out any number.
1b.
How many B's do they have in common? 2. So I'm factoring out
B squared.
B squared.
Oh,
Everyone okay with that?
Wait,
So when they don't have a number,
where's the 2?
it's, you know, put nothing.
It's technically
Even
1B
if it's
squared,
fine.
but we don't have to put the 1 there.
Oh, well, we can if we really wanted to.
You could put the 1 there if you wanted to, yeah. I wouldn't count it wrong. Okay. B squared times what would give me 2B cubed?
2,
2B
yeah.
or not 2B? That is the question. I know.
That was funny.
Okay. B squared times what would give me 3B squared?
3.
Plus 3. Everyone good with my first set of terms factoring out the GCF? Okay. Negative 14b and negative 21. What's the biggest, or what's my GCF of these two terms?
7 and
7? Okay, let's try to factor out a 7. 7 times what would give me negative 14b?
negative 2.
Negative 2b. 7 times what would give me negative 21? Negative 3. Do I have a common binomial between these two after I've factored out my GCFs?
No.
I don't. It's close, right?
Yeah.
Is there something I could do to make them have the same binomial?
Multiply by negative 1.
Very good. Instead of factoring out a positive 7, I could factor out a negative 7. Because they're both negative, correct? So I'm factoring out a negative 7 instead of a positive 7. Let's see if that helps me out any. Negative 7 times what would give me negative 14b?
Negative 2. Oh, yeah.
Positive 2b.
Positive 2b, right?
Yeah.
Negative 7 times what would give me negative 21?
3.
Positive 3. Now, do I have a common binomial between these two sets?
You do.
Between these two terms? Yes, I do. So, what's one of my factors going to be? 2b plus 3. The thing they have in common, right? 2b plus 3. That's one of my factors. That's another one of my factors.
B2 minus 7.
b squared minus 7.
Oh, yeah. B squared.
And can I factor any of those any further? No, I cannot. So there's my answer. Questions on 2? We're kind of understanding it. Most of the time, for grouping, you're going to group your first two terms together and your last two terms together. For today's purposes, you're going to do that on the assignment for today. Group the first two terms, group the last two terms. Factor out each GCF. Okay? Questions on those 2? One more example. Can we do that? Okay. 35p cubed minus 49p squared plus 105p minus 147. Got some big numbers. Do I have a GCF between all 4 terms? What is it? 7? Let's try factoring out a 7 to begin with. 7 times what would give me 35p cubed? Just 5?
5p.
5p cubed. Everyone okay with that? Am I moving too fast?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to slow down.
I'm tired.
I put the parentheses because I'm factoring out a 7. All 4 of my terms have a GCF. They all 4 have a GCF of 7. So remember, before you factor anything, always, first and foremost, look for a GCF throughout your whole polynomial. Okay? That's what we're doing here. This one does have a GCF throughout the whole polynomial. 7 times what would give me negative 49p squared?
Negative 7.
Negative 7p squared. Everyone okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
7 times what would give me 105p?
15p.
15p. Everyone okay with that?
Wait. Why are we going that far?
Because they all have GCF.
They all have a
Yeah,
GCF.
yeah.
Remember? I'm looking at, hopefully my smartboard will catch up with my writing.
Oh, they crash.
Explosion.
Let me pause real quick. Has a GCF of 7, correct? So now 7 times what will give me negative 147?
Negative
What? Negative 21? Now I have factored out my GCF out of my whole polynomial. Does my whole polynomial have any other GCFs to factor out?
No.
No, that's it. 7 is it, okay? Now, I can look at factoring by grouping. So I've got 4 terms, correct?
Yeah.
I'm looking at this new polynomial in the parentheses. 5p cubed minus 7p squared plus 15p minus 21. So, based on today, what are we going to group together?
The 15p and 21 and the 7 is cubed and
15p minus 21,
5 cubed and 5p cubed and 7.
5p cubed minus 7p squared. Everyone okay with that? Okay. Do I need to bring that 7 along for the ride?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. It's part of my answer. Okay? So, looking at my first set of terms, 5p cubed minus 7p squared, is there a biggest number besides 1 that goes into 5 and 7?
No.
No, there's not. How many p's do they have in common? 2. So I'm just factoring out a 1p squared or p squared.
Are you putting this in brackets?
I am, because I'm going to have sets of parentheses in there as well, because I factored out that 7 to begin with. Okay. P squared times what would give me 5p cubed?
1. Well, 1
What?
p.
P squared times what would give me 5p cubed?
5.
5,
5p.
5p. Very good. Everyone okay with that? Yes.
Why isn't the 7
Say it again.
Why isn't the 7
The 7 I factored out of my whole polynomial. Now I'm factoring by grouping inside the set of parentheses, so my 7's outside still. Brackets are just another grouping symbol, like parentheses, but I use them so I'm not using like 3 parentheses right after the other. Okay? Does that make sense? So, p squared times what would give me negative 7p squared?
Negative 7.
Negative 7. Everyone okay with my first 2 terms? It's confusing? Okay. What's the biggest number that goes into 15 and 21? 3. Do they have a p in common? No, they don't. So can I factor out a p? No, I cannot. So 3 is my GCF of those last 2 terms. Is everyone with me? Please let me know if you have any questions. 3 times what? Okay, 3 times what would give me 15p?
Guys, Mike, I'm a part of that GSF.
5p. And 3 times what would give me negative 21?
Negative 7.
Negative 7. Everyone with me on those last 2 terms? All right. Any questions on what I've done so far?
No.
You okay? Do I have a common binomial between my 2 terms now?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. So, remember, the 7 needs to come along for the ride. What's my first factor?
5p.
5p minus 7. The binomial that they have in common, correct?
Yeah.
Oh.
Everyone okay with that?
Down.
What's my second factor?
5p.
P squared plus 3. My GCFs, right? Is everything factored as far as it can go?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Here is my answer. 7 needs to be included out in front of your 2 factors. Because I factored that out at the beginning. Okay? Questions on this last example? What's your question? Nothing. Well, if you don't understand it, then you got to have questions.
I understand none of it.
So what's your question? Where can we start? I need somewhere to start.
Let's just do another example.
Oh.
Can we just
Okay, how about I give you the assignment? We can go over some of those on the assignment. Everyone okay with that? Are there any questions before I end the recording?